Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley. This show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation and the Compassionate Friends. Well, today my co-host is my daughter Heidi. Hi, Heidi.
Hi, Mom.
And along with Heidi is Alan Pedersen, Executive Director of the Compassionate Friends. Well, Alan and Heidi, we're taking on a tough topic.
We are, and we've taken on a lot of tough topics, but I think today is a very special program. We have very special guests today.
Absolutely. People that work in the field of suicide are absolutely amazing, and these two people are very helpful to the world. How do you want to tell us about them?
Absolutely, and as Alan and my mom said, we are going to be talking about supporting suicide survivors today, and we have two guests that are experts on this topic. Our first guest will be Marilyn Koenig. She is a bereaved parent, and her son Stephen died at 18. She is the co-founder and executive director of Friends for Survival. And then we will be talking with Dr. Patrick Arbore. He is the founder of the Friendship Line. So welcome to the show, Marilyn.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome.
It's great to have you on, and the wonderful work you're doing with suicide survivors and have been doing for so many years.
Over 34 years.
You know, Heidi and I have been working in this field for a while, and so has Alan, and sometimes people say, wow, aren't you over it? What are you doing still working in this field?
Yeah, it might seem like that to the outside people, but you know, if my son Stephen hadn't died by suicide, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be home baking cookies for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But somehow or other, this was what I was supposed to do, and it isn't depressing. Actually, there's a lot of laughter in our office because we see how we can help people, and it's very gratifying. Their notes and the feedback we get to know that we have really made a difference. And it's very hard after a suicide death to find somebody that can companion with you and understand what you're really going through and how difficult it is, because we didn't understand it either before we were in this position.
Talk a little bit about when Stephen died, and in that time, what kind of information was available out there, and how did you survive your personal story in the early days and months?
Well, Stephen died 2 months before high school graduation. He was a student at a Catholic boys' school. I have 7 children, and he's the one I didn't worry about. He was the compliant child who thought drinking and smoking cigarettes was stupid. He wanted to get A+. He was registered for college to be a criminologist. And it was a total shock to all of us. Everybody. He never ever gave any kind of signs, the traditional signs that we now know about. He didn't give any of those signs. And yet he planned it. He wrote 7 notes. The only clue we have in his notes is that he said, "This isn't anyone's fault. I just don't have any future." Academically, he was getting A's, and mostly A's. He was even taking a class at the college during his high school senior year. Wow. So he was very gifted, had a part-time job at Baskin Robbins, and he was, I don't know if I was supposed to say a company's name, but I did.
They got good ice cream, by the way. Just saying.
But they trusted him the night he killed himself to close the shop by himself with his coworker. He gave his coworker a ride home, and fortunately went off on a very isolated road and shot himself in the head. So it didn't happen at home, which he was very thoughtful. He was a very thoughtful, giving kind of person, artistic, very, very artistic and very academically gifted.
But there wasn't support at that time,
No,
was there?
no. I never knew, the only time, I didn't know teenagers killed themselves.
Right.
Had no idea. And the only time you'd hear about suicide was in the Sacramento Bee and page 3, and it'd say victim number such and such jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. I thought it was homeless alcoholics that had no family
Right.
that killed themselves. I had no idea that Middle America was killing themselves. I did not know that.
And so when did you get into action and start doing something work-wise?
I cried and prayed and cried and listened to gospel music was how I kept going. And then my youngest child was 2.5. My oldest child was 19.
Wow.
And where did Stephen fall in this?
He was the second child, he was the oldest boy. So I had a 19, an 18, 17, 16, 15, a 12, and a 2.
Wow, you were
Oh my
busy.
goodness.
Yeah, so I had to keep going on that part, but I've always been a volunteer of Girl Scouts and Cub Scouts and room mother and all those kinds of things. So it's kind of been my lifestyle to be out volunteering and doing things. I think back in the 70s, and I thought about it when Steve died, if nobody talked about depression or suicide or any kind of related mental health issues in school, and no adult talked about it, and we didn't know the kids killed themselves, why would a young, sensitive person ever bring it up? They're not going to talk about it if we don't.
Right.
If we don't say anything, they think that there's probably something weird with them. And I think maybe that's what was going on with Steve, and it was just heartbreaking.
Yeah. How long before you started, and how did you start the organization? Because I think people are looking at you and thinking, you know, how's she doing it? How's she picked herself up? You know, how is she where she is today?
Well, I go back to the times about 2 or 3 years later. The shorter story is, I made some calls to schools and thought, what are they doing to help teenagers? And I called several school districts and asked for a school counselor, and one of them that answered the phone really stuck in my head, and I said, what do you do for students that might be feeling depressed or suicidal in your school? And she said, we don't have that problem.
Wow.
And I said, well, in the Sacramento area, 6 to 10 teenagers kill themselves every year. She said, well, you know more about it than I do, and she hung up.
Wow.
So I had opportunity to do some advocacy in legislation, and so we were trying to garner some letters to the California legislature regarding programs in suicide prevention for youth. This was about 1981. And in the process, I thought, oh, I heard about Compassionate Friends, by the way.
Right.
And I thought, well, there must be other parents or other people there, or parents that might have lost a child with suicide. So I went to a meeting, and I met this other mother who had lost her 17-year-old. And we listened to one of the professors talk about grief and suicide, the first time they'd ever talked about suicide in Compassionate Friends.
Wow.
And they had the biggest attendance they'd ever had.
Wow.
People came out, they'd been getting the newsletter, but probably never thought they would be comfortable.
Sure.
And that's a hard place to be. So she and I afterwards looked at each other and said, where do people go? What do people do? What about spouses? What about if you lost your parent? What if you lost your sibling? Where would you go? And so we kind of kicked that around a little bit, and pretty soon we were doing research in the community and started out, that was probably in the fall, September, October. By February, we had 8 people in her living room, and that was our very first meeting in 1983.
Wow. And what's your organization called now?
Friends for Survival.
Friends for Survival. Until you brought a fabulous quilt today.
Yes.
And we're going to show it on the screen. And tell us about your quilt.
Well, we actually have 5 quilts. This is a national quilt because we thought about it locally and thought, now what about people who live in rural areas or other areas where there's no resources? There's no quilt program. So we presented it in our national newsletter, and people around the country have sent us quilts. So we did, this is strictly a national one.
Okay,
Oh, I
and
love
what
that.
are the pictures on it? We're looking at the quilt now.
Okay. Well, each family makes their own square, and underneath it we did write, I don't know if that'll show up on the screen, but every square has a state printed underneath it.
Ah.
So some are California.
Yeah, I saw the New York one because I'm
There's
from New York.
New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to go look at the quilt closer up.
I love the
Southern
name of it.
California.
Families separated by suicide.
Amazing.
So-
well, I want to
Yeah.
ask you a couple of really tough questions because I need to know myself. Can I ask people how their family member died? Can I query them? I am also confused with suicide because sometimes I feel like it's too invasive. You know, can I ask people questions about their child? I mean, it would be a natural thing for me to ask somebody, how did your child die? Or how did your family member die? You know, what do I do?
Are you talking about meetings or just one-on-one?
Either way, meetings, Compassionate Friends meetings.
In meetings, I would not really ask because they're going to hesitate because if their child died in a car accident or cancer, their comments have been made in the past to some people saying, well, your child chose to die. which is not even real. They did not choose at that point.
Right.
But that's a whole nother show. But I would give them the chance to say, if you were going in a meeting, to say, if you just want to say your child died tragically and you're not ready to talk about it, that's fine. Just say that. It was a tragic death.
That's great.
You don't have to say they died of cancer. You could just say after an illness. You do not need to really ask. One-on-one, when people call us, we do ask if it's a suicide. We don't ask them how.
Okay.
Not unless they volunteer it.
All right.
Okay, if they want to volunteer, they will say it without our ever asking. But because of our organization is just for suicide deaths, we need to know that the people getting our materials or coming to meetings are there for the right reason.
But what if it's my next door neighbor? I mean, how can I help them with suicide? I don't know. I just hear there's a lot of guilt and shame. And I know, as a bereaved parent, I think suicide people are sometimes surprised that we feel a lot of guilt and shame too. It doesn't matter how your kid died.
Yeah.
You should be able to take care of them.
Right.
I mean, parents take care of their kids.
You know, I think just say, if it were a neighbor, I'd just say, I'm so sorry about the tragic death of your whatever. And then let them, because some people cannot say the word suicide for months and sometimes years.
Somebody told me even years, didn't they?
Yeah, and the thing that I've heard, and it's been my experience, is that people are fascinated and almost fixated on the way that they died. But then they'll say, okay, how did Stephen die? How did Ashley die? How did Scott die? And then they move on. And the minute they find out, rather than, okay, now talk about how they lived. Who were they? What were they like? And that's kind of what we want to talk about.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about a little drill down on your organization, because isn't a part of what you're doing is you have a guide, because for other people who are out there and they want to find out, well, how do I get a group of people together? Talk about how your organization can help.
You can hold that
somebody.
around so we can get a camera shot.
Well, we were very fortunate to be able to do this with monies from the state of California, paid for these books. And because the suicide prevention segment of mental health under Proposition 63 includes one little sentence in it saying that there needs to be more services for families after a suicide death, families and friends. And by the way, our definition of a survivor or a member is anyone who's been affected by the suicide death of another. So it could be a neighbor, it can be a coworker even, it can be a student if you were a teacher. So because of that little sentence in the suicide prevention strategy for California, we were able to get funding to write this, and this is 30 years of development by over 50 board members over the years, and the goal is to develop or enlarge and increase services, even for a group that's already meeting, to a sustainable and effective peer support program.
Yeah, it's
So
terrific.
it needs to be sustainable, but if you follow this, it will be sustainable, and it helps you with fundraising, talking on the phone to survivors. It talks about how you get community collaboration support for your organization in a community.
Let's show the roll-in with Patrick Albacor, who is a physician in San Francisco who has started a friendship line, because it's going to fit into all of this and the work that
Somebody
Patrick
you know as well.
and you are doing. Yeah. Did you know him before the show?
Oh, yes.
Fabulous. Delightful.
We've
I
been
didn't
in the
even know
same-
that. I
we've
knew
been
you
in
were
the
out
same
chatting
conferences
away.
and meetings.
So let's take a look at that roll-in, and then we're going to have Patrick come in and be with us on the show.
It's a very important public health problem in the United States.
Older adults are 2 to 3 times more likely to commit suicide than younger adults. So we started the Friendship Line because we knew we needed something different.
The Friendship Line services that we are currently committed to is our 24-hour Friendship Line, which is both a hotline, warm line. We receive calls, and we also make calls out to people who are lonely, isolated, depressed, possibly suicidal.
We're the nation's only accredited hotline and warm line for older adults in the entire country.
When I first started working here, there was a man who started calling, and he'd had a traumatic brain injury. So what he would say was he would talk about how he wanted to die. and he didn't see that he had any purpose in life anymore.
People need to have somebody that they can trust, that they know that is just going to be on their side. It's going to be an ally for them.
Oh, what a great film, and thank you for being on the show, Patrick Applecore.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on, and you two knew each other. We didn't even know that.
Yes.
That's so much fun. Now, Patrick and I mean, you know, say fun. It's really odd, but when we work in these fields with these wonderful people who need our help, who've had a loss, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
I say it's very, very heartwarming because I have met so many wonderful people nationally and have friends we would never have met if there hadn't been a suicide death. I mean, lifelong friends.
Yep.
So there's a lot of payback. It's not all horrible and tragic.
And the human spirit is just so inspiring when you work in this field, and the giving and all that. But Patrick, we were talking earlier on the show about, surprisingly enough, the highest rate, and as they were saying on there, of suicide is older people who are alone, right?
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons that we began the Friendship Line in 1973, because what we saw were those statistics, and yet what wasn't being revealed were the calls to places like traditional suicide prevention centers, that older people were highly underrepresented. And so what we were tasked with was the opportunity to try to find another way to target older adults who were depressed or bereaved or isolated or lonely, or using substances in an abusive way, and we wanted to create conversations with older people rather than confrontations. And so when we were thinking of, should we say crisis intervention for older people or whatever, and that just felt again too confrontative. And but when we decided on Friendship Line, and I would answer the phone, hello, this is Friendship Line, my name is Patrick, and how may I help you? And what that invited that person on the other end to be able to talk in a conversational way. It didn't have that charge, that confrontation, suicide prevention. And at the time, if we had 50 contacts in a month, I thought that was pretty good. And last month, we had 8,500 contacts. And so our 800 number is not just in the Bay Area or California, it's also across the country. And so what we've learned is that older people will respond if there is a service that really kind of understands who these older people are, and that they want to talk. And that's what Friendship Line does, and that's what your groups do, and our groups too. We have traumatic loss grief groups. And what I believe in so much over these 44 years is talking. We have to talk. And if we're talking, we need somebody to listen, and listening is a key component.
And not try to fix us.
And not try to fix.
You can't fix us anyway.
And not minimize.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and to really just create a safe space, and allow people to just share, as you were saying, what they feel like they can share. And we don't push them or force them. You don't have to make a grand confession. But what you can say is, what's happening to you right now? Right, just as you were talking earlier. It's really this. What we're doing right now is what is so urgent for people who have had traumatic losses, and that they can let us know what's going on, both spiritually or intellectually or physically, and know that somebody's listening, that I really care about what happened to you.
Absolutely.
And to your son.
I'm kind of just feeling, is there any cross-pollination between the young people that are feeling so desperate and the older people that are feeling so desperate? I mean, they talk about bringing animals to the hospital and how they have little nursing schools in elderly home, in
Preschools.
next to preschools, next to retirement centers and all that. And I'm just thinking with the suicide thing, is there any cross-pollination,
Well,
with the older and the younger?
Our volunteers, and thank God for volunteers, and I'm sure you thank God for volunteers too.
Definitely.
And so we have younger volunteers on the friendship line, we have older volunteers, and sometimes people will say, well, these younger people, what are they going to do if an older person's on the other end? How do they connect? And I said, because we're all humans. You know, it's the human connection. I don't really care that much what my age is or what other people's ages are, because all we have to do is care. I say to our volunteers in training class that they'll say, well, but I don't have clinical training. And I said, do you care about people?
Oh, I love that.
You know, that's all you need. If you care about them, we'll give you the rest. We have this wonderful 19-year-old volunteer who is so good, and he's so caring, and he's 19.
Right.
Well, it's interesting because on my psychology licensing exam, it said, what is the #1 most important thing in being a really good psychologist? And it was empathy. It's caring.
That's right.
It's not how many years you've been in the field. It's not how many classes you've taken. It's exactly what you're talking about.
And I say to my volunteers, just open your heart.
Yeah.
You know, and when you can do that, everything else will fall into place. Because that caller, even though they can't see you, will feel the energy of that, you know? And it's really, you know, kind of like alchemy. You know, a process happens. It's very hard to, you know, dissect or analyze. But when somebody is really saying, I'm so here for you, you know, and in this time that we have, whatever you want to talk about, I will listen. You know, it's so important.
So if I'm watching this show today and I'm looking at you guys, I'm thinking, what can I do? I've had a suicide loss. I feel like I need to help. I feel like what would be a piece of advice you want to give
See,
me?
I would say it's really important to trust that feeling you have first, which is, I want to do something, you know, but I'm not sure. One thing they can do is call our friendship line. You know, it's 24 hours, it's across the country. The
You want to give us that number?
It's 800-971-0016.
Good, and I think we've got it online too. And what have you got suggested for people?
Well, you know, I felt compelled I needed to do something. I didn't know what it was. So if you're watching this program and you're thinking, what can I do? There's no bereavement services for survivors after a suicide death in your community. Or maybe you have some and they're not very effective, or they're having a hard time connecting in the community, and there are more suicides, but they're not coming to group or they're not calling you. Contact Friends for Survival, and actually this manual, or this guidebook, is on our
Pathways to
website.
Purpose and Hope.
It's on our
and your
website.
website is?
At friendsforsurvival.org. You can download it from there and call us. I'm really considering going to different areas and maybe doing a workshop and helping people to really establish a more sustainable group, because it is a hard thing to sustain if you don't have some guidebook. I wish I had this when we started. It would have saved us a lot of time.
All right, that's
and a lot of
great.
effort. And we're willing to coach and to help, and so I would encourage you, wherever you're living in this United States, which has many, 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 many areas with no help at all.
Oh, thank you both for being on the
thank you.
show. It's really great. And Alan and Heidi, pretty amazing, isn't it? These
Two
guys.
amazing organizations. I
Yeah,
mean, you know,
and
you
two
sit
amazing
back-
people running them.
Absolutely. I just, you know, that's what I love about the world that we're in. We meet so many incredible people who've started such incredible works that benefit people, and wow.
And thank you guys. And Alan, you're
Yes.
going to sing for us
I
now,
am
right?
gonna
And what are
sing
you
for
going to sing?
I'm going to sing a song called One More Yesterday. I wrote it about 11 years ago. It's an oldie, but
All
a goodie.
right,
All
Alan,
right.
Heidi, and I'll close the show
All
while you
righty.
get ready to go sing.
All righty.
Great.
We want to thank you for watching this show today, right, Heidi?
Absolutely. And I think for me, the takeaway here was no one out there needs to feel alone, because you're not alone.
Absolutely, and giving you some really nice tips on things that you can do and how you can be of service, because if you're early on, you might remember to let people serve you, and that's a gift to them. And as time goes on, then you can move on to serving others. And Heidi and I want to always remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless. And now we'll hear Alan.
I guess I should keep my eyes on the road up ahead. Keep on moving forward, that's what everybody says. that time will heal the heartache and life goes on. But it's hard to face tomorrow when all you really want is one more yesterday, one more chance to say I love you, I miss you since you've gone away. To laugh like we did back then, to see your face again, I would give anything. There's no price I wouldn't pay for one more yesterday. Wish I may, wish I might. I wish I could have one wish tonight. Well, maybe someday I can live without looking back. Learn to take my comfort from those moments that we had, and let go of that part of me always wishing there was more. But until that day finds me, I'll keep longing for one more yesterday, one more chance to say I love you, I miss you since you've gone away. To laugh like we did back then, to see your face again, I would give anything. There's no price I wouldn't pay for one more yesterday.